Hi, I'm Carol Parsons, Director of Pastoral Care at First Pres Littleton. If you've heard that before, it's still true. Today, I'm blessed with the opportunity to wrap up the preaching series that Cody started on Easter Sunday. Not that long ago, really, but with the persistence of the COVID pandemic, it seems to me, and maybe to you also, that is in the distant past. We've been exploring the questions that God and Jesus ask us in the Bible, not because they don't know the answer, but because they want to reveal something to us to help us be more of the people that each one of us was created to be. Today's question is so important that it is found in all four of the Gospels, and we will be looking at it in the Gospel according to Mark. Before we jump into the text, I'd like to give you just a little bit of backstory. Jesus and his disciples have been on the road traveling through Galilee on their second preaching and healing tour. Jesus also likes to use that time on the road to deepen his relationship with his disciples. But despite his best efforts, perhaps you can relate, the disciples often seem preoccupied with their own ideas about who Jesus was and what their role was with him. Jesus knows that the disciples have been arguing among themselves as they neared home, and he'll want to talk to them about that. But because Jesus is humble and gentle in heart, he waits until everyone is comfortably settled in the house before he says a word. Listen for the voice of the Spirit speaking to the church through Mark chapter 9, verses 33 through 37. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and then taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." This is the word of the Lord, so thanks be to God. I love this passage. I hope you find it stirring as well. It's so human, so like us, arguing among ourselves as we walk along our spiritual journey with Jesus and one another. Jesus pops the question, "What were you arguing about on the way?" Silence. Not one of the disciples say one word. Nothing. Mark tells us that they were silent, for on the way they had been arguing with one another about who was the greatest. And as much as that might have been a great conversation among the disciples, they knew that such a conversation, such a topic, would not set well with Jesus. So they were zipped. But of course, Jesus already knows the topic of contention. He sits down, and they gather around to hear him say, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." I expect this concept is not news to you. We've heard Jesus say something like that or very similar to that before, right? Remember in the run-up to Easter, on the same night as the Last Supper, Jesus blew the disciples away when he took off his robe, tied a towel around his face, and began washing every one of their feet. "I set an example for you," he said, "as I wash your feet, you wash the feet of others. I don't know about you, but I can't wash feet. Standing on a pedestal, probably not even sitting on a pedestal. You have to get down. You have to get low, sit on the ground, or in my case, a poor knees, perhaps something similar in your case, a low stool. The point being, Jesus has been redefining greatness all through his ministry, and he does it again in this text. To be great in God's kingdom is to be servant of all. We get that, right? But actually, here in this text, Jesus doesn't stop there. He takes it further. He suggests that being great means more than just being a servant. It means to be the servant's servant. Of all Jesus' teachings, this one definitely is one of the most countercultural and counterintuitive. If you're looking for fireworks, this teaching has them. A bold, blazing blast of revelation about greatness. I considered shooting off a bunch of Roman candles to get the point across, but finally, I had to reconsider. Sorry to disappoint you. I have only words, God's and mine. As I was talking with a friend the other day about Jesus' definition of greatness, he told me the story. Perhaps you know it. The magic cockroach. I know what you're thinking. She has some weird friends, but you probably could have guessed that. So there's this janitor, and he's working in a large corporate office building. He's in the basement one day doing his job, sweeping up, when a cockroach runs across his workplace. He reaches out to swat it, and just as he is about to bring the broom down on the cockroach, it looks up and says to him, "No, don't. I'm a magic cockroach. I'll give you whatever you want, just don't hurt me." Intrigued, the janitor pauses, looks up to think, and then says, "Whoever works up there," pointing to the floor above him, "I want his job." And sure enough, when the janitor comes in the next day to sweep the basement as usual, he's told to report upstairs. He's been promoted to manager. Yet again, he's working away when a cockroach runs across his desk. He reaches out to swat it, and again the cockroach says, "No, don't. I'm a magic cockroach. I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't hurt me." The man immediately blurts out, I want his job. I want the job of the one on the floor above me." And so, you guessed it. When the guy comes in the next morning, he's told to report upstairs. He's just been promoted to vice president. And yep, the guy's working away again when the cockroach runs across his desk. Can you imagine such luck? He's just about to kill it when the cockroach again says, "No, don't. I'm a magic cockroach. I'll give you whatever you want, just don't hurt me." The guy says, "Whoever works up there," pointing to the floor, that would be the top floor above him, "I want his job." The next day, the guy arrives and is told he's now the chief executive officer of the whole company. After sitting a while in his plush leather chair behind his magnificent desk, he stands up. He steps out onto his private, spacious executive balcony, and a cockroach runs across the floor. He raises his foot and he's about to squash it when the cockroach yells out, "Don't! I'm a magic cockroach. I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't hurt me." The guy can't hold back and says, "Whoever works up there," pointing to the crystal blue sky above him, "I want his job." Excited to see where his new wish will take him, the guy rushes to work the next morning. He finds a note telling him to report to the basement for his new position as janitor. The disciples wanted to be great. There was a time when I wanted to be great. Maybe you too. The disciples wanted the top corner office with the private balcony looking down on everything. And you could make a safe bet that they weren't thinking of that greatness being in the basement. If we can't be on the top ourselves, we tend to want to associate with people who are at the top. When we're with someone perceived as being great, we, by association, are perceived to be great as well. But Jesus even takes that associated greatness from our mindset, so we can't even boast by association. Perhaps this can be illustrated by the story of the three wise men. That's right, Christmas in July. You see, the three wise men were searching, as they told Herod, for the one who had been born King of the Jews. You would think these important people with extravagant gifts might look for the king in palaces, mansions, or places among the rich and famous. But no, they bowed down and associated themselves with a young child, with no means and no status. And they gave their valuable gifts, knowing the young child could give them nothing in return. No favors, no privileges, no titles of greatness. And yet they chose to associate with him and serve the servant by taking the story and their own experiences back to their homeland. Being with Jesus means we're not on the top floor in the magnificent appointed corner office. No, instead, we're in the basement. We're doing much of the work no one else wants to do, the work that many people think is beneath them. After a few months at my first church job right out of seminary, the other pastor came to me to tell me how to be successful as a pastor. You need to stay as high on the beehive as possible. That's your job, he said. Stay as close to the top as you can. That way you can see whatever's going on throughout the hive. He warned me, you can't get down into the hive with the worker bees. It struck me as odd at the time, and I didn't think I'd be able to do that. Of course, you see, I wasn't able to do that. I was a complete failure at doing that. And all these years later, I've done two things. I'm the worker bee pastor, and I strive to work for the worker bees. And isn't the incarnation, God taking human form and coming to earth to live among us, the penultimate example of leaving the top of the beehive and getting down with the worker bees? Also, in today's text, Jesus tells us that we must welcome children, because when we do that, we are welcoming him and welcoming God. To make sense of this, we need to understand what Jesus was trying to say by using a child. Children in Jesus' day were not valued as they are today. They were considered to have no status or importance. They were inconsequential. But Jesus tells us to welcome them, esteem them, help them, serve them. Because when we do that, when we serve the weakest and the most vulnerable, those who can't repay us or reward us, we are welcoming Him and welcoming God. Who are those in our society today with no status or value, who are marginalized and exploited? How can we welcome them more? Jesus said, and He says to us still, "The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give His life as a ransom for many." He died like a servant is supposed to die, giving all He had for the sake of others. He didn't do it for Himself. He did it for us, those with no worldly status or clout, and those with lots of worldly status and clout. So let's revisit the Syrian question. What are you arguing about? Do you desire to be great in God's kingdom? My prayer to you, me, and the entire church is that we will make choices that connect us in new and meaningful ways with the least among us. That we will live, not just learn, but live Jesus' definition of greatness and rejoice in being the servant's servant. Amen.